This is Railroad Corporation. This is the Steam page, and you can see the release date officially was the 18th of November 2019. When it came out, I was interested in it almost immediately. I actually had meant to buy it immediately because I was looking at the time at Railway Empire as a possibility for a playthrough, which I have since done. And in the end, I didn't buy it until 2 years later when it was on sale. But some of my interest was based on the misconception that it was a sequel to Railway Empire. In reality, the sequel is Railway Empire 2, which has its own website here. And I'd like to do a playthrough of it eventually once it's on sale on Steam. It looks like they at least went for a more realistic look this time around in terms of the graphics. As a game, the original Railway Empire was very gamey. This time it looks like they went for more of a simulator look, so more realistic, less gamey. But I'm not going to do it now. Railroad Corporation will be my project for today. And Railroad Corporation was developed by Corbie Games, as you can see here, and distributed by Iceberg. Very surprisingly, it doesn't have a Wikipedia page. If we look here on the Iceberg Interactive entry, Railroad Corporation is listed here, and there is no link. Just as a last desperate attempt, if we put it in the link here, my prediction is nothing's going to come up. Yeah, nothing. So it isn't that it's horribly unpopular. As you can see, it has mostly positive reviews, and 1,001 users have reviewed it. It seems to base its business model, not in the game, but in real life, on the DLCs you can get for it. You can see at least 10 of them are listed here. And they basically give you additional campaigns you can do. That's basically the point. I haven't found any yet that give you any additional trains. The trains that you see in it are mostly older 19th century locomotives and similarly vintage freight cars and some passenger cars. Just like Railroad Tycoon, it very much is about supply chains. And we'll see that when we get into the game. My feeling is that of all the other railroad strategy games out there, it's probably much more like Railroad Tycoon 2 and 3 than it's like Railway Empire, in good ways and bad. And as you can see at the moment, it's on sale. It is the 30th of November, 2024, as I'm recording this part. So it's actually a pretty good deal because you can see the list price is a little bit high. That's for the complete collection, as you can see there. If you get just the most basic version, only €7.02. Which is very cheap. And you can see the DLCs are similarly cheap right now, with 2 of them free. Anyway, I'll take a look at the actual game here. This is the main menu for the deluxe edition of Railroad Corporation with the Civil War DLC. Actually, the autosave there is for the Civil War scenario, which I've been experimenting with. And they have a listing of the DLCs. I don't actually have the Roadmaster DLC, which is really the biggest one of all of them. I'm missing several. I have the Yellow Fever one. volatile markets. I haven't tried that yet. But going back, you can load saved games. There's a multiplayer function also. I haven't tried this. Clearly you need the correct DLCs for your game. Obviously everybody else has to have the same DLCs so that you don't end up with a data file mismatch. Free game is more traditional, just you, single player. That sandbox tab there is deceptive. It actually isn't sandbox. You actually do have to compete. At least if the options are anything, just go on. Campaign missions are not available for the moment in free game. And those lakes and mountains and twin rivers and so on are the maps. Actually, the options are really what matter the most. They determine the difficulty of the game. The need to research each locomotive will start you out with the best friend of Charleston and move you up. Most of the skill levels, you get all the locomotives from the beginning, which is not completely realistic because you usually start in the 1830s and you end up having 10-wheelers and consolidations, which are mostly locomotives of the second half of the 19th century, especially from the 1870s onward. But you can switch to need to research each locomotive if you want to. It adds an extra dimension to the game. You can also build your own maps. This is in beta only, so it's a little bit awkward. You can download or upload from or to the Steam Workshop, so it's completely integrated with the game. Although, if I'm being honest, I haven't tried it. The game is, after all, from 2019, after the Steam Workshop was well established. If you build your own, let's just say playthrough map. We create. You can put in a preview thumb there if you want one, but you don't have to. Steam title. Let's see what we can do about a more specific title here. Steam title. Playthrough map. Very good. I don't feel like a description really. You can see you can change your preview PNG or really your thumb there. And then the land is considered separate. So you have to create the map itself, the geography. I don't know why that name is all screwed up there. I've tried to fiddle with that to get it to work, but it seems as if that is just coded wrong. But if we go to biome, there, is there anything else? No. The seed, we get a seed, but you can also import things like the biome, although they only give you the forest biome in this case. Custom generator of mountains, and then of course you can put in terrain masks and all this to enter presets. I'll just pick Kentucky Tweak, mountain mask. I don't really know what I'm doing here. But if we throw this all in, forest mask, do we have one? No, we don't. Seems like they should have a default one, but it looks like there is none. Forest map, there is not available. I could try generating without it and see what we get. So generate 1x1 chunks. This will not be very impressive, but just so that you see what you can do with it. You have other options too, obviously. But we're going to play it very quick and easy here. That generation is taking an awfully long time. Okay, finally we got it. So there's our map. with no towns on it at all. And we end up with some forests on it anyway, apparently, even though we don't have the mask. So we save that. Unnamed land. Playthrough something? Let's see. Playthrough land model or something. Okay. So the cities are added when you create the scenario, which is a little bit counterintuitive. Saving is completed. I guess we go back. Yes. So, scenario. Create the scenario. Playthrough map. Skip all of this. Create mission. So on and so forth. Yada yada. I still do not want to put in a description. I just don't feel like it. What are we doing here? I have not fiddled with this very much, so I am inevitably screwing stuff up here. That's what I wanted. Edit. Okay. So, just for the towns, without towns you can't really do anything. But towns are actually not towns. Towns can be industries. See this? So a town with 2,000 inhabitants can be placed anywhere on the map. So you get the idea. For the main menu, get rid of our junk map here so that I'm not stumbling over it later. Notice the Railroad Corporation 2 is already on sale over there. Now this is just the regular options. Nothing special here. Just what you need to play the game. So maybe we will just get into the game. Before I start, I'm going to look at one of my mature games to show the locomotives that will not be in the playthrough because I've chosen to have the scientific development option activated. So if I go up here to buy a new locomotive, there's the 10-wheeler and the Mason Bogie and the Consolidation, the Mogul, the Forney, the American Standard, Menman, Jervis, DeWitt Clinton, and John Bull. Actually, the John Bull will probably be in my playthrough. I don't know if they have anything past the 10-wheeler, because I don't know if you can play past the 19th century for one thing into the 20th century. I know that should be an easy thing to check, but I've not been able to find the information online, and it takes a very long time to play one of these scenarios through the end. And you can't easily change the date. So anyway, this is my playthrough, starting in game year 1835. And the locomotive that I have available for this is the Best Friend of Charleston, which is really already an anachronism in 1835, but I have played this map a number of times. The cities and the locations are always the same. And to start with, one of the best ways to raise money for everything else is to start with a passenger line from Hoboken to Haverhill. So I'm going to lay some track here. When you lay track, your stations are placed automatically in Railroad Corporation. So North Richland Hills, which will later be a freight destination, is for the moment just there as an investment in the future. Then Olympia is the same deal. That will be a freight station later, but for the moment it's only a stopover on the way to Haverhill. There's the best friend of Charleston. And this will be a very simple point-to-point route. And as I said, by 1835, the best friend of Charleston wasn't really very remarkable. It was already obsolete, actually, because it has the vertical boiler and all these really, really old features. It's sometimes billed as the first American-made steam locomotive, but that's not actually true, because the Tom Thumb predated it, as did the John Stevens. Pause there, that's annoying. So I need to put in a repair shop somewhere in here, and I need to upgrade the station in order to get the slot there. Because the more you upgrade the stations, the more facility slots you get. And your office building in your headquarters city is similar, as you'll see later. Now I would like to see here if I can actually put in a freight line right away at the beginning of the game here. I'll see if I can set up a wheat field to, they say farm, it's really slaughterhouse. See if I can do this. I need two things. I need the money, but I also need to be able to weather the losses in the overdraft so that it doesn't go up to 50,000 and disqualify me and lose me the game. Because in the default settings, you can alter it of course, but in the default settings for the normal difficulty, you only get a 50,000 overdraft. Up there I could sell the leather later, but that is not plausible right now because it's too far away. So, Haverhill will receive meat. It will also get a maintenance facility because the freight train has to be maintenance somewhere too. You find out pretty quickly that that's really a necessity in this game. If you don't both have the maintenance facilities and schedule regular maintenance, your locomotives will quickly hemorrhage money because they're constantly breaking down. There are a lot of similarities with Railroad Tycoon 2 and Railroad Tycoon 3 in this game. I think that those are the two most obvious games to compare this to, both in terms of gameplay and in terms of visuals. So there I'm getting a warning of the overdraft. And of course the trains at this stage are extremely slow. First of all because I'm using the best friend of Charleston, second of all because I've chosen to load them up to maximum capacity. Signaling in this is very, very crude. Basically, you get signals wherever you have a joint in the tracks, as you can see there, or if you have a switch. Otherwise, you aren't very well set with block signaling in this. Generally, the blocks are spaces in between the stations. And that's not always a good thing. I mean, it does incentivize you to double track as early as you can, but the other problem is that's rather expensive, and in the early part of the game you want to develop all your routes first. And then the double tracking, of course, is to deal with the congestion, so that you're not losing money that way. That building over there, the factory building, is actually an oil refinery. You can see in the menu for North Richland Hills, it identifies it and says what it takes and what it puts out. Again, much like the Railroad Tycoon series and Transport Fever, which I tend to play more nowadays, even though I still am a huge fan of Railroad Tycoon 2, at least. Yeah, the visuals are very noticeably similar to the Railroad Tycoon series, at least 2 and 3 anyway. Very, very similar in look. You can hire additional people to improve one aspect of your company's performance or another, similar to hiring the managers in Railroad Tycoon 2. But you need an HR department at your office. So if I upgraded this office, I get these other slots for things. So research and development, HR, trading, finance, and law, which really means lobbying. So they say law lobby. Later on, if I get the chance, I'll upgrade that office to at least get the research and development going. The finance is more lackluster. I've not been hugely impressed with the finance aspect of it. The overdraft is basically your credit. Basically, you use the overdraft as credit. But you can't really be all that ambitious because you're limited to a $50,000 overdraft, and in addition to that, you can easily go deeper into debt after you've gone into overdraft initially, so it's very risky taking too much of it. You certainly can't use all of it. And I'm eager to get this train into the station here so that we get some income and we can wipe out some of the existing overdraft. No street traffic simulated, even though in the promotional materials it makes it look like there's street traffic. The cities are modeled relatively crudely, basically only a cut above Railroad Tycoon 3. So we're not talking about a serious competitor to Transport Fever 2 here. This is a whole other way of approaching railroad business games. They call this the farm. You can see the animals moving around because it's been supplied with grain. If you don't supply it with grain, the animals aren't there. And actually the grain field, whenever you're harvesting grain from it, the steam tractor operates. So it's a little bit Lionel Trains in its character. But on the other hand, many other similar games are like this. For example, Transport Fever, the industrial facilities won't give off any exhaust unless they're working, for example. Train 2 is setting out with what theoretically would be reefer cars, although it looks as if they've just taken boxcars and painted them orange here. That route is, from my experience with previous games, reasonably profitable. Although, the further down the supply chain you go, so the more processed the products become, the further away you get from raw materials, let's put it that way, the higher the value of the products you're selling. Or shipping, rather. So, once you go from, for example, cotton to textiles to furniture, or cotton to textiles to clothes, the furniture or the clothes are easily the most valuable product. And supply chains are very much a part of making money in Railroad Corporation. That's also true of Railroad Tycoon and Transport Fever and Transport Fever 2. But it seems as if it's a very large part of Railroad Corporation because it's relatively freight-oriented. The way you make money is by hauling freight. Not so much with passengers, although passenger will make you a little bit. If it were more technically realistic, I think the passenger trains would be more fun. But in this, they're just another kind of freight, which it's respectable, but not like something that's much more than a starter at the beginning of the game. Because subsequently, you really want to set up supply chains of whatever products. So for example, the Hoboken headquarters there, which is always the one they give you in this map, if you put in grain and lumber, you get barrels of whiskey. And the whiskey is actually pretty valuable, although the way the map is set up, it's difficult to produce it early in the game, because your connections aren't really there yet. Naturally, as the game progresses and as your network gets built up, you have more choices. And notice we are now in profit. Oh, nope, not anymore. Only for a second there we were in profit. When you look at the trains in the menu, it tells you the lifetime profitability of the train. So now we're getting the overdraft warning again. Sped up the time scale here so that we're not waiting forever to raise the money for the next step in this Railroad Empire's, or rather Railroad Corporation's development. This can be a frustrating aspect of many of these games, is waiting for the funds to accumulate, but in Railroad Corporation this is aggravated by the fact that the credit system is really not very useful. Basically, you want to use plowback most of the time. Which is neither hugely realistic nor in line with other games like it. Of course, one relatively realistic aspect of this is that if a train is heavily loaded, it's relatively slow, and if it's not heavily loaded, it's relatively fast. So that aspect of the simulation, if you will, is accurately represented. And they give you the loadings in tons, rather than in basically abstract loads or pallets of something, as you would see in Transport Fever. So now both the trains are in profit, the company is in profit, so now we just need to accumulate enough money to actually do anything. And then once we have enough money to do something, we shall see what it will be. I think the easiest expansion here is to go northwest to Homestead there, because there's a textile factory there, or actually a furniture factory, which demands textiles. So we can take advantage of the textile factory in Haverhill, because we have a cotton farm relatively nearby, right there, in Fargo. And so if we extend the line to Fargo like this, we have a supply of cotton which can be sent to Haverhill and then can be forwarded over here to Homestead. It's not a complete supply chain because we don't have the lumber for the furniture, but early on in the game that's not a problem. If there's a demand for textiles and you deliver the textiles, you make some money. And over the longer run, I'll complete that supply chain to ship the furniture to Haverhill. Of course, one of the things you have to think about is, just like with other games like this, when you build a line, you need to budget for the construction of the line, but also the cost of the locomotive, or other rolling stock if that actually costs you money, like in Transport Fever, for example. Actually, one of the most difficult, or maybe deceptive things about Transport Fever is it might look like you can afford a train just because you can afford the locomotive, but you might get killed on the coaching stock or the wagons, which can be very expensive. Now I'll save this because you should always save stuff, right? This will be part 2 because I've already done an initial save for today. As of December 1st, when I'm recording this. Overdraft warning again because I just put in that capital investment and went into overdraft to do it. And those trains are still moving slow, although I've toned the time scale down so that we're running in what passes for real time in Railroad Corporation, which is to say, not real time at all, just slower. What is true about it is that the days pass relatively slowly. So you spend a lot of time in a particular time period by default. So by the time I reach the end of this playthrough, we will still be in the 1830s. But hopefully we will have accomplished quite a lot. Transport Fever 2 actually allows you to slow the time passage down also, but you have to do it manually. Even as of now, there are 3 trains already in service, which is a nice start, considering that it's still the first game year. I am tempted to speed up the time scale here because this is taking a really long time. We're still in overdraft. Let's speed it up. Because as long as we're in overdraft, there's not a whole lot more we can do except wait. As I said before, it is possible to double track, but at this early stage of the game it doesn't really make commercial sense. And I've tried early double tracking in other game saves, in other words, other attempts on this particular map, and I've regularly bankrupted myself actually, because none of that is free, even though my sense is that you have to spend less on it than in some other games like this, like Transport Fever or Railroad Tycoon. One of the unfortunate things is that that wheat field is perfectly placed to feed the whiskey distillery in Hoboken. Getting enough lumber to it to make the barrels is more the issue, since that's one of the things you have to do for it. You could make money, but it would be very limited, because without the barrels, the distillery can't make the whiskey for you to ship. And the whiskey is the big payday there. Of course, I keep saying sell. I keep getting this confused with other business games, because you're not selling any of this stuff, you're shipping it. Now, supposedly you can buy and sell your own products later on in the game if you build your trading office into your headquarters. But I haven't tried that, and I don't know how well it works. In general, I would say my favorite railroad strategy games remain Railroad Tycoon and Transport Fever. Specifically Railroad Tycoon 2 and Transport Fever 2. This game, I think, would impress me a lot more if those other games didn't exist. Because there's nothing wrong with it. I think this game is quite good. But there's a sense of been there, done that with this. Because much of what's in this has already been done in Railroad Tycoon 2 in particular. And Railroad Tycoon 2 is from the late 1990s. And Railroad Tycoon 2 you can play indefinitely. As I said, I don't know if you can do that with Railroad Corporation. I haven't been able to figure it out because they make it kind of difficult to experiment with it in spite of there being an editor. And actually, that's one of the other advantages of Railroad Tycoon 2, is that Railroad Tycoon 2 is very easy to mod, at least in terms of maps. Trains I haven't tried, but my understanding is that's also possible to do. So where are we here? We're in profit, but we're not exactly gushing cash, to use the term from Railroad Tycoon 2. I think that when I connect the lumber mill up there, I will go through Gresham, getting to the logging camp first, just because the terrain makes that more optimal. Actually, there's an argument for it being more optimal generally, because the return would go through the logging camp. One mistake I've found you can make with this map is if you connect Homestead and Gresham prematurely and only run passenger trains, because that is not a hugely profitable passenger route, and it can put you too deep into overdraft just because you spend the money initially and then you don't have the income to follow, even if the passenger train you put in is perfectly profitable. Save it again here. See what we can do. I have $28,406 there in the company's account. We do have to put in a maintenance stop for this textiles train. One thing that you can notice with the train menu there up in the upper left is that they have a little steam locomotive icon, and that indicates condition of the train. So nice brilliant green means it's in perfect condition, and red means it barely runs, if it runs at all. And there's a lot of in between. So that tells you how you're doing on maintenance, and eventually the locomotives do age out. They become too difficult to maintain in their old age. So just like in real life, there are sometimes reasons to get rid of them beyond obsolescence. The wrench icon over train 1 indicates that it's being serviced at Hoboken. And then the shovel indicates it being cold, of course. For whatever reason, they've chosen not to simulate water in this, even though watering is very much a part of running steam locomotives, more so than coaling, because you have to water the locomotive many, many times before you have to put more coal into it. Okay, 23,000. Oh, it's 37? Okay, now we're getting somewhere. Just got lucky. A whole bunch of stuff got shipped at once, and the textiles get delivered, and now we're really sitting pretty. We got $61,318. So we're in much better financial condition now. That extension up to the northwest is risky, though. I've always found that to be the case on this map, and so I am hesitant to act just yet. I would feel more comfortable if I had over 100,000, if I'm being honest. There's the logging camp and the sawmill. So you can see how I'm going to connect it up. Gresham Logging Camp Sawmill. And that way, trains can go from the logging camp to the sawmill and then double back past the logging camp to get to the rest of the system. Initially, I'll send the lumber to the furniture factory because it's better set up and ready to go. And then subsequently, I'll send lumber with other trains to the distillery, or whiskey refinery as they call it. And then we can ship some whiskey, which should be quite profitable, hopefully. There's also an oil refinery there in North Richland Hills. You need to find an oil well for that. I know there's one in the extreme southwestern end of the map, but at the moment it's not practical to go down there yet. This is a fairly elaborate game, and so I'm considering doing a long play also, after I finish with the basic playthrough. As I've said already, I don't think this is the most spectacular game of its kind I've ever played. However, it's still nice, and the longer you play, the more features you get to see, just like a lot of games like this. Because some of the features don't become evident in the early stages of the game, and so you miss a lot if you have a relatively modest playthrough like this one. This is taking a really long time. It's really, really time consuming to raise the funds. I mean, this is why I would prefer having like better finance in this game. But as I've also mentioned, there is a sequel out now, so maybe the sequel will have the finance end a little bit more developed, maybe. I haven't tried it yet. I haven't tried Railroad Corporation 2 just yet. So train 3 is coaling again, but we have $112,000 now. So now we can actually look at that extension. Put in the save. Time part 4 for December 1st. Real world December 1st, because we are in November 14th, 1836 in the game. Still very much in the infancy of American railroads. Outside the Northeast, you didn't generally find very many in the 1830s. Of course, the best friend of Charleston operated in the South, but it was kind of an exception. And to put it in perspective, in 1836, there was no New York Central Railroad. And almost all the big names other than the Pennsylvania weren't around yet. And the Pennsylvania was not completely private at the time. It was effectively a government project initially. And it wasn't strictly speaking a railroad. Or to give another example, the Delaware and Hudson was still a canal company in the 1830s, even though they already had railway lines. Alright, so we got another passenger service here, but now, using Train 1, it will run from Gresham through Hoboken to Haverhill. But I've got to get this line out to the sawmill. So we now have the logging camp at Roswell connected to the sawmill at Mount Cato, and it can bring the lumber back through Gresham to the rest of the map. So now some proper supply chains are possible. And there are a few places to sell the paper from the lumber mill too. Whether I'll get to it in this playthrough is another story, but the biggest challenge here is I only have the best friend of Charleston, so I have to do something called doubling the train, where you have to run the same train twice to get all the freight through. So this is a real technique in railroading, although in real life it usually means splitting one train into 2 cuts. When I initially tried this scenario, I thought this is not going to be a good result until I realized I can just run it like the real thing. Because I was thinking you can't double head a train in Railroad Corporation, but you can double the train. So I doubled the train. So that lumber will go down to Homestead, where the furniture factory is. So the textiles or the cloth will come in, so will the lumber, and the furniture will go out. So we have our first proper supply chain here from beginning to end, starting with logs and cotton and ending up with furniture. I need a shop here. I have to upgrade the station. There we go. So the train can also be maintenance there at the end of the run, which is the most convenient time I've found. That way your supply chain doesn't get delayed, it just loops, rather. Which is how supply chains work, obviously, with the maintenance at the end of the loop. You can see another textile factory there in Iowa City, and a cotton field. But all this is about money. It would be a very easy supply chain to set up, but I have to set priorities here, and I already have a supply of textiles for the furniture factory. Ready to roll. Save it again. Time Part 5. Well, that's the best we got here. There are a lot of choices of things, but you need to be selective because you have to think about how much it will cost, how much money you have, and where your tracks are, because one peculiarity of this map, at least, is that all your new track has to connect to your existing track. You can't just put like a separate railroad out in the middle of nowhere. Everything has to be connected somehow or another to Hoboken. Let's see if I can upgrade the office. Nope. Hey. No, yes, no. Let's try it. Okay, so all locomotive power can be updated in this way. I can select 6 scientists to work on it to speed up things. It'll cost money, but maybe I'll have the John Bull in another cycle. If I get the higher locomotive power, I can go for the John Bull, and then these trains will run better and I'll be able to haul a lot more per train, and doubling the train will not be as necessary. Overdraft again. I already knew that though. Maybe I shouldn't be going down to the wire every time I do capital investment of pushing the company into overdraft every time, but it seems like if I didn't do that, it'd be very hard getting anywhere. Train 4 coming around the bend here, soon to pull into the sawmill. And there'll be a sawmill animation. One thing about these lumber cars is that they're very, very heavy. So that train will double now and bring in more logs. And when it gets to lumber, it will just barely have enough horsepower to pull it. Which is again why the John Bull will be a welcome upgrade from the first locomotive, best friend of Charleston, which is really, as I said, anachronistic and underpowered. So here we have another train of logs. The sawmill starts up, cuts some more lumber. Train should be loading up even though we can't see it. One of the things about these stations is that you can turn the train around or change tracks or do any number of switching moves inside the station under the train shed. It's a means for the developers simplifying the train animations in this game. These stations aren't necessarily realistic for America because it is set in the United States and everything has a train shed. But having the switching moves hidden does make things a little bit easier. In Railroad Tycoon 2, they just ghost the trains, letting them run through each other. But in Railroad Corporation, it's a different approach. Alright, John Bull. I'm ready to research it now, or my scientists are anyway. Or maybe not. Looks like I still don't have the money, which is an ongoing problem in this game, as I've said before. No finance, you know? The John Bull locomotive is especially useful for these logging trains because it means I don't have to double the train, whereas all the other trains will run with just one run. This is the one most difficult of all the trains on this route. So, here's the lumber train. That looks like 4 cars, but it's actually only 2, because these are very, very big lumber cars. I'm not sure if they're even period correct, actually. They look like they could even be 20th century. And it is really slow, even with the time scale sped up. I usually hold off when I have an incomplete supply chain on the final train that will haul the furniture, for example, because otherwise the train sits idle and eats up money, and it's just much better to give it time. Okay, I have enough money for the John Bull now, so it still will take a while to develop, but at least I'll have it. Okay. Meanwhile, the other trains are chugging right along here, bringing in other funds so that now the balance is up over $26,000. Oh, but not for long. Still over $20,000 though. So, Train 4 is creeping along into Homestead, which means that that furniture factory can start producing furniture, and I can consider the furniture train. One thing that happens is when a factory is manufacturing, you can see the gears spinning there in the progress bar also. You have to be far enough away from the town so that you get that menu, but otherwise it gives you an indication of where you are production-wise. So here's my furniture train. Still using the best friend of Charleston locomotive because I don't have the John Bull yet. I can cut my losses by bringing passengers back along the line and dropping them off in Hoboken. It's not a perfect solution to empty running, but it's something I learned from various other railroad strategy games, including Railroad Tycoon 2. I think Railroad Tycoon 2 is the first place where I figured out how to do that. It's not necessarily something you would do in real life because the locomotives wouldn't always be compatible, but in these games it's a way of being more efficient. So Train 5 is coming out to Homestead to pick up the furniture. When it arrives in Haverhill, it should make a good profit. Okay, so overdraft again. I already was expecting that. No big deal. The thing is, that furniture train, as you can see, is very much in the red because it's been running empty. And this is going to be a little bit of a knife's edge running up against the overdraft there. But I'm pretty sure this will work. Especially because if you notice, train 3 is about to make a delivery. And train 2, we shall see. Train 2 is also carrying a shipment of meat to Haverhill. So, even if I'm losing money on Train 5 in the short term or the long run, it will arrive, and Train 2 and Train 3 will cover for it financially in the meantime. But as you can see, it's kind of threatening there, because partly as the game progresses, you can end up deeper in overdraft much more quickly, because the amount of money your company is handling becomes much larger as the company grows, of course. Get another warning. As I said, I'm very aware of that. So Train 2 makes its delivery. And I'm still in overdraft, but not as much. Train 5 delivers. I will have completed my first complete supply chain. And I may consider turning this into a long play, as I've already said. I'm nowhere close to running out of opportunities on this map at this stage of this particular game save. You can see the steam tractor at the wheat field there, although it's not working at this second. And Train 3 is coming in. Because we're single track, I have to wait for it. Now it has to pull out the back. And Train 5. Still has to wait for Train 2. Again, because we are not dealing with double tracks here. And now Train 5 can highball. Because it only has 2 boxcars on, it's not as horribly slow this time around. It just seems that way. Haverhill, of course, has a lot of different things you can do with it, but I'm not at the stage of doing a long play just yet. But see, $30,250 per car there means that I'm easily out of overdraft now and into profit. And my research is not quite to the John Bull yet, but overall, I'm ready to either to say thank you for watching or see you in the long play. As I said, I really like this game, and if you haven't tried anything comparable, I think you'll really like this game. If you have, I think it'll still hold up pretty well.